They've been lying to us our whole lives about how human civilization developed. From the school bench, they hammered into our heads a linear and primitive picture of the world, where man sequentially went from a digging stick to a smartphone. But what if I tell you that this ladder of progress is just a smokescreen? What if the history they teach us is artificially pieced together from scraps to hide the fact of a global, high-tech civilization whose capabilities surpassed ours? You were deceived. And the evidence of this deception isn't hidden in secret bunkers. It's lying right under our feet, scattered through the impassable jungles of Central America. Today we'll talk about the thousands of stone balls of Costa Rica. But forget what they write in tourist brochures. We'll conduct a dry, mathematical, and technological analysis that makes official historians' hands tremble. Imagine the situation. The 1930s. Workers of the American corporation United Fruit Company are clearing dense tropical forests in the delta of the Diquís River. Heat, humidity, malaria mosquitoes. They're clearing land for banana plantations. And suddenly, amid wild vegetation where no modern man's foot has stepped, they stumble upon something that defies common sense. This isn't temple ruins or hut remnants. These are perfectly round stone spheres. Not one, not two, or even 10. Hundreds of them. They lie in groups, forming strange geometric figures, or rest lonely in the mud. Sizes vary from tiny ones the size of an orange to giants over 8 feet in diameter. Official science immediately slapped a convenient label on the find. They tell us these are ritual objects, created by Indian tribes sometime between 300 BC and 1530 AD. Supposedly, ancient masters armed with stone hammers and sand spent years polishing boulders to give them spherical shape. Sounds romantic, doesn't it? Hardworking natives, sun worship, primitive tools. But let's cast aside the lyricism and switch on the logic of an engineer and materials scientist. Most of these spheres are made of gabbro. This is an igneous rock comparable in hardness to granite. On the Mohs scale, gabbro's hardness is 6 to 7. For comparison, the hardness of steel in a regular kitchen knife is about 5.5. That means, to work gabbro, you need tools made of material harder than gabbro itself. The Indians of that era, according to the official version, had neither iron tools nor, moreover, diamond cutters. They had only stone, wood, and possibly gold, which is a soft metal. We're asked to believe that people took one stone and hammered it against another for years to achieve perfect spherical shape? This is technological absurdity. Try taking a piece of granite and shaping it with a pebble into a perfect sphere. You'll end up with a shapeless stub, but not a sphere with deviation within millimeters. And that's exactly the precision we're talking about. But more on that later. Now let's look at the weight. The largest specimens weigh about 16 tons. 16 tons! That's the weight of 2 adult African elephants, or a fully loaded dump truck. And these boulders aren't just lying at the foot of a quarry. The nearest gabbro outcrops are in the Talamanca Mountains, about 50 miles from where the spheres were found. Think about the logistics of this operation. 50 miles over rough terrain, through jungles, rivers, and swamps. Without wheels, without draft animals. Official history claims that pre-Columbian American Indians had neither horses, nor oxen, nor wheeled carts. How did they do it? They tell us fairy tales about thousands of slaves rolling these stones on logs. Have you ever tried rolling a 16-ton load through a swamp on logs? The logs will simply sink into the ground under such pressure. This is physically impossible without a prepared road, embankment, and complex engineering support. But even if we assume a transportation miracle, the question arises, why? Why expend colossal societal resources, divert thousands of people from hunting and farming to haul a huge stone 50 miles and then rub it with sand for years? For a ritual? That's archaeologists' favorite excuse. If they don't understand an object's purpose, they call it cultic. But any civilization is pragmatic. Such energy expenditures must have a practical, technical purpose. We see here traces of industrial production, not artisanal crafting. The spheres have varying diameters, but within size groups they are identical. This resembles calibration, as if someone set up serial production of items to certain standards. And here we approach the most terrifying question for historians: surface finish quality. Many spheres, before erosion and vandals damaged them, were polished to a mirror shine. Polishing gabbro is a complex technological process requiring high hardness abrasives and high rotational speeds. By hand, with a piece of hide and sand, you won't achieve a mirror finish on an igneous rock. You'll just scratch the stone. All this suggests we're looking at the remnants of something grandiose, something that doesn't fit into the picture of a world with Indians in loincloths. This is technology we've lost, or, even more frightening, technology that was deliberately taken from us, erasing the memory of those who lived here before us. Who could handle thousands of tons of granite like styrofoam? Who possessed geometry knowledge surpassing medieval Europe's level? Why do scientists stubbornly ignore the fact that many spheres were found deep underground, in layers that may be older than any known cultures? This brings to mind that these objects survived a global catastrophe, flood or debris flow that covered the territory of modern Costa Rica. We see only the tip of the iceberg, pitiful remnants of former greatness that accidentally surfaced. Let's dive into the technical details that make official historians nervously rewrite their articles. The most astonishing thing about the Costa Rican spheres isn't their weight, but their geometry. We're talking about perfect spherical shape. Researchers from the University of Pennsylvania, who took measurements in the mid-20th century, were amazed to discover that the diameter deviation on many spheres doesn't exceed 2 millimeters. Think about it. 2 millimeters on a stone 2 meters in diameter. That's precision available to modern CNC machines. That's industrial standard level, not handiwork of an aborigine with a stone chisel. To create a perfect sphere by hand, you need constant radius control in all 3 dimensions. Any engineer will tell you it's impossible without a fixed rotation center and rigid template. If you just hammer the stone, trying to make it round by eye, you'll get something like a potato, but not a mathematically precise sphere. The official version asks us to believe that ancient masters used wooden arcs as templates. But wood is an unstable material. It deforms from humidity and temperature, and granite is uncompromising. Here we encounter another mystery that textbooks diligently ignore: processing technology. When striking a crystalline rock like gabbro or granite, micro-cracks occur. Impact techniques inevitably leave traces of stone structure destruction to a depth of a few inches. However, the surface of these spheres is smooth, dense, and apparently shows no signs of impact damage. This leads to 2 shocking hypotheses, each of which destroys the official chronology. First hypothesis: this is machine processing on giant lathes. Imagine mechanisms capable of rotating 16 tons of stone at high speed. What energy powered these machines? Where are the remains of these factories? The second hypothesis is even more inconvenient for traditional science. It's casting. What if these spheres weren't carved from natural stone, but cast from complex geopolymer concrete? We know that similar technologies were used in the construction of Egyptian pyramids. as evidenced by independent studies of block structures. If this is artificial granite, then we have traces of a highly advanced chemical industry. This means knowledge of recipes, the ability to grind rock into powder, mix it with binding components, and pour into perfect spherical molds. Where did tribes living in huts of palm leaves get stone plasticization technology? This is the absurdity we're forced to believe, just to avoid admitting the obvious. We're dealing with the legacy of a civilization one step above ours. Now let's talk about the scale. We're not talking about a dozen spheres. There are thousands of them. Officially, about 300 large specimens are registered, but locals and black diggers know that many more are hidden in the jungles and underground. Imagine the labor costs. Suppose making one sphere by hand takes a year of work from a 10-man crew. That's an optimistic estimate. Multiply that by thousands of items. We get millions of man-hours. Who fed this army of workers? Who provided their housing? A primitive society's economy can't afford to support thousands of people engaged in producing stone balls useless for survival. That's economic collapse. This is only possible with highly efficient agriculture and machine production, when survival issues are already solved. And most importantly, the arrangement. The spheres weren't just lying in heaps. Before they were hauled off to museums and lawns of wealthy mansions, they formed complex geometric compositions. Lines, triangles, parallelograms. Some groups of spheres were oriented strictly to magnetic north. Others pointed to the sunrise points on equinoxes and solstices. These are navigational and astronomical markers. Why would Indians in the jungle, where the horizon is invisible due to trees, need such a complex orientation system? It only makes sense if there were no jungles back then, if the terrain was open, or if this was marking for flying vehicles. We see a system, a global navigation system or energy grid, the operating principle of which we've lost. But the most interesting part begins when we look at the map of similar sphere finds around the world. Costa Rica is no exception. Stone spheres are found in Bosnia, Kazakhstan, New Zealand, and even on Franz Josef Land in the Arctic. This is a single signature, a single standard, a single global civilization that marked the planet with these objects. And if their concentration is highest in Costa Rica, it may mean that an important hub was located here. A transport hub? An energy station? Or perhaps a military base? Official history tells us that these cultures didn't contact each other, that American Indians and Eurasian tribes developed in isolation. But identical stone spheres, made with the same impossible technologies, say the opposite. This is material proof of a single world that existed before the catastrophe. A world where granite was like putty, and geography was entirely different. Why then are many spheres found broken? Not just cracked by time, but deliberately destroyed. Someone really wanted to erase these markers from the face of the Earth. Or did they burst from exposure to colossal temperature or energy? But let's step away from the shape and look at the context, which literally screams of global falsification. Most of these granite giants were found not proudly standing on pedestals, but buried under layers of soil, silt, and clay several feet thick. Official archaeology, like a stuck record, insists on local floods and natural soil deposition. But any geologist, looking at the stratigraphy of these sites, will tell you that such a layer of sediments could only form in one case, as a result of an instantaneous, catastrophic event. This wasn't a river overflow. It was a massive debris flow, a tsunami of mud and water that engulfed this region, burying everything living and non-living beneath it. These spheres weren't left or lost. They were buried alive at the moment of the death of the civilization that created them. We literally walk on the roofs of a flooded world, and the stone spheres of Costa Rica are just a few surviving parts of a gigantic mechanism that the flow couldn't carry into the ocean due to their monstrous weight. And here we approach the most explosive theory that academic circles fear to discuss: the theory of functional purpose. Look at these spheres as an engineer, not as an art historian. What does a perfect sphere made of super hard material remind you of? It's not an idol. It's not a decoration. It's a technical component. In modern industry, similar spheres are used in ball mills for ore crushing, or, more likely, as giant sliding bearings. Imagine the scale of the mechanism that required bearings 6.5 feet in diameter and weighing 16 tons. How big would the machine itself have to be? Perhaps these were rotating platforms for giant telescopes, radars, or even launch complexes. Or elements of earthquake-resistant foundations, the operating principle of which we're only now beginning to rediscover. There's one more physical fact that makes your hair stand on end. Granite and gabbro are rocks saturated with quartz. Quartz has a piezoelectric effect. Under compression or vibration, it generates an electric charge. Imagine thousands of such spheres installed in a specific order, tuned to resonate with the Earth's crustal vibrations. This is a giant piezoelectric power plant, a wireless energy transmission network that Nikola Tesla dreamed of, but which may have been implemented thousands of years ago. If these spheres vibrated at ultrasonic frequencies, they could be used for anything, from levitating heavy loads to creating protective fields or even weather control. And this explains why many spheres are found cracked. The official version states that the spheres burst because farmers burned the forest to clear fields, and the stone cracked from temperature changes. This is a lie aimed at naive schoolchildren. To split a monolithic granite sphere 6.5 feet in diameter, you don't need a campfire from branches. You need a thermal shock of colossal power, comparable to the impact of plasma weapons or directed energy beams. The nature of the fractures on many spheres indicates an internal explosion, as if the material couldn't withstand the overload. This suggests that before the catastrophe, this planetary energy system was operating at its limits. Could it be that the overload of this network led to the global cataclysm? Or was this infrastructure deliberately destroyed in a war of the gods? A war using weapons whose principles are beyond our grasp. Now let's calculate the demographics, because numbers are the enemy of any lie. Archaeologists attribute the creation of the spheres to the Dikis culture. But according to estimates from those same scholars, the population in this region was extremely low. These were scattered settlements living by hunting and gathering. To organize production on this scale, you need a centralized empire with a population in the hundreds of thousands, with developed bureaucracy, logistics, and, most importantly, a surplus of food. Where are the traces of their cities? Where are the remains of roads? Where are the irrigation canals? They're nowhere. We're offered a paradox, a ghost culture that left nothing behind except the most complex engineering artifacts. It's like finding a modern processor in a Stone Age cave and saying a Neanderthal carved it with a flint knife. The reality is that the Dikis culture most likely just found these spheres. They came upon the ruins, as we visit the ruins of ancient temples. They saw these majestic objects, cleared the dirt from them, and began worshipping them, considering them eggs of heavenly birds or gifts from the gods. They tried to imitate the gods by creating their own, smaller, crooked copies from soft stone. And it's precisely these pathetic handicrafts that confuse modern researchers, mixing ancient high technology with the cargo cult of surviving savages in one pile. We confuse the inheritors with the creators. We attribute the construction of the highway to to the ants living in cracks in the asphalt. And one more fact that's carefully hushed up: local legends. The Baruka and Bree Indians have tales stating that the spheres were soft when they were created. The wind blew, and the stone became soft. What is this if not a description of stone softening technology using sound or vibration? Their legends say nothing about years of sanding. They speak of instantaneous creation by the power of thought or voice. But we arrogantly dismiss these testimonies as fairy tales, preferring to believe in thousands of slaves with abrasives. What if the fairy tales are actually the precise technical instructions, simply transmitted in the language of people who had lost scientific terminology? What if our ancestors are telling us directly, "We knew how to change the density of matter," and we laugh in their faces? We stand before the fact of total historical cleansing. Someone very diligently removed all the metallic parts of this gigantic machine, leaving only eternal stone. The golden ornaments found near the spheres are just scraps that held no technological value for the looters who were clearing the planet after the catastrophe. Or was gold used in these schemes as a conductor, and what was found in the graves is melted down parts of past microcircuits? Do you think this is fantasy? Look at modern circuit boards. They also have gold, stone, and silicon. The difference is only in scale. Our civilization is on the path of miniaturization, while the previous one followed the path of megalithism. But the essence is the same: working with energy and information. And apparently, their civilization ended instantly. A switch flick, and darkness fell, in which only these granite spheres remained lying, silent witnesses of the apocalypse. Look at the world map from a different angle, and you'll see something that gives geographers a nervous tick. If you connect the locations of megalithic structures, pyramids, and these very stone spheres with lines, you won't get chaos, but a perfectly calculated mathematical grid. Costa Rica occupies a key position in this coordinate system. It's not a random point on the map. It's an important node in a global geodetic network that girdled the entire planet long before we learned to draw maps on parchment. Someone divided the Earth into sectors with precision available to us only from satellites. And these granite spheres are reference points, physical markers of this global layout. Imagine the level of civilization for which the planet was not a vast, unknown world, but a comprehensible, measured, and mastered object, like a suburban plot. They knew the Earth's dimensions to within a foot and placed their stone beacons where necessary for the operation of their planetary machine. But the scariest part of this story isn't the creation of the spheres, but their methodical destruction. Let's return to United Fruit Company. Official history states that workers blew up the spheres with dynamite, thinking gold was hidden inside. Think about the idiocy of this claim. Workers who deal with stone every day suddenly decided that monolithic granite was a Kinder Surprise with a golden filling. This sounds like a cheap excuse to cover up a deliberate cleanup operation. A corporation with ties to the United States government enters the jungles and immediately begins destroying ancient artifacts, blowing them up by the dozens. This isn't vandalism. This is wiping files from a hard drive before an inspection arrives. They were destroying evidence. Evidence of a different history, different technologies, and different power being here. How many unique mechanisms were turned into gravel under the guise of clearing land for crops? We'll never know the exact number, but it's in the hundreds. And now let's recall exactly how they were found. Deep in the mud. That's the key word. Mud. Clay. Deposits. We keep stumbling upon traces of the so-called mud flow or mud flood. This is the phenomenon when massive volumes of soil come into motion, flooding first floors of buildings worldwide, burying cities beneath them, and, as we see, entire technological complexes in the jungles. Geologists call it soil liquefaction. This happens during the most powerful earthquakes or vibrational impacts. Imagine the ground under your feet turning into quicksand in seconds. Heavy stone spheres that stood on the surface simply sank into this slurry like buckshot in jelly. And when the vibrations stopped, the soil hardened again, forever entombing the evidence of a great era within it. This isn't a process of millions of years. This is a catastrophe that occurred practically yesterday by historical standards, possibly just a few hundred years ago. That's precisely why official chronology fears these spheres so much. They are inconvenient witnesses. They lie in layers that don't match the fabricated timeline. If we admit that these perfect spheres were created and installed before the clay covered the continent, we must also admit the fact of a global catastrophe that erased the previous humanity. And that, in turn, puts a cross on the theory of smooth evolution and progress. It means we're not the pinnacle of development, but the barbarized descendants of survivors, scurrying amid the ruins of the gods. We can't even replicate what they did on an industrial scale. We drag these spheres to museums with tractors, place them on pedestals, and write plaques, "Ritual Stone," because we're ashamed to admit our own helplessness. Look at the authorities' reaction. Instead of turning Costa Rica into a center of world research, they declare the discovery site just a park and shut down studies. Funding goes only to those willing to confirm the official version about Indians with hammers. Any attempts to conduct spectral analysis of the composition, check residual magnetism, or scan the ground with ground-penetrating radar to greater depths are blocked or ignored. Why? Because under these spheres, there at a depth of 30 or 60 feet, may lie the remains of whatever these spheres stood on. Platforms, foundations, cable channels, a system that's being hidden from us. Doesn't it outrage you that they treat us like idiots? They show us a 16-ton granite sphere with perfect geometry and say, "A savage made this to pray to the sun." This is an insult to human intelligence. This is a spit in the face of logic. We see a product of high technologies, possibly surpassing ours. Technologies that used principles unknown to us: anti-gravity, sonic resonance, geopolymer casting. And realizing this fact evokes not just curiosity, but genuine existential horror. If such a powerful civilization was destroyed in an instant, erased from the face of the earth by flows of mud and fire, then what guarantees our safety? Maybe these spheres are not just machines, but a warning? Black boxes of a crashed plane called Earth that we just can't decipher? We live in an artificial matrix of false history. They invented the Middle Ages for us, invented the Dark Ages, to hide the gap between them and us. So we don't ask questions. Where did the billions of people who populated this planet go? Where did the factories disappear to that produced millions of bricks and thousands of granite spheres? Why do our cities stand on buried first floors? The stone spheres of Costa Rica are a crack in this screen. Through it seeps the cold light of truth. And this truth is that the world is much more complex, scarier, and ancient than written in textbooks. We are a species with amnesia that woke up in a broken house and tries to convince itself that it was designed that way. But the shards of former luxury, such as these spheres, don't let us sleep peacefully. They silently scream that we've been deceived. And the scale of this deception is such that its revelation will lead to the collapse of all modern political and religious institutions. That's why they stay silent. That's why they blew up the spheres with dynamite. They don't fear the past. They fear that we'll understand who we really are and who controls us now. Now that we've pieced together all the fragments of this puzzle, a picture emerges before us that takes our breath away and chills our blood at the same time. The stone spheres of Costa Rica are not just a mystery of the past. This is a verdict on our present. Look at our world. We build from glass, plastic, and fast-decaying concrete. Our information carriers are fragile hard drives and cloud servers that will disappear in a couple of decades without electricity. If a global catastrophe happens tomorrow, nothing will remain of our civilization in 1,000 years except a layer of strange plastic sand. But the creators of these spheres thought in different categories of eternity. They knew what was coming. They understood that the cyclicity of history is inexorable, and that the next cycle would destroy everything not made of solid stone. That's why they left us these granite messages. Perhaps these spheres are the most reliable hard drives in the universe, where information is recorded at the level of the quartz crystal lattice. We've simply forgotten the password to this computer. We look at a flash drive and try to crack nuts with it. Ponder the concept of the Great Reset. Not the one they talk about from the podiums of modern economic forums, but the real, planetary reset that occurs regularly. These spheres survived a blow that erased cities and evaporated seas. They remained lying in the mud as silent witnesses that humanity had already reached peaks we can't even dream of. And this scares those who rule the world today. Because if we understand that development doesn't go upward, but in a spiral, or even downward, the entire ideology of modern consumption and submission will collapse. If people learn that free energy, anti-gravity, and eternal materials are not science fiction, but lost reality, they will stop paying for gasoline, for cardboard mortgage apartments, and for medicines that only relieve symptoms. Knowledge is power, and knowledge of the real past gives power over the future. That's why official science so fiercely defends the theory of primitive Indians. They need you to feel small, weak, and dependent on the system. They need you to believe that only savages with spears ran around here before us, and we are the crown of creation. But the truth seeps through, like water through a dam. We see that these technologies were global. We understand that we've been artificially driven into a technological Middle Ages, banning the use of ether technologies and resonance, replacing them with burning oil and coal. The stone spheres are evidence of a crime against humanity.